Linda Cracknell is a writer of fiction, non-fiction, and occasional radio drama, as well as a self-employed teacher and facilitator of creative writing in various settings. Landscape, place, and memory are key themes in her work. Following 2 collections of short stories, her novel Call of the Undertow was published in 2013. It concerns a cartographer working in isolation in Caithness and her unusual relationship with a local boy who begins a process of revelation through his own maps. Doubling Back, 10 Paths Trodden in Memory, published in 2014, is an account of a series of walks, each of which follow a story from the past, personal, biographical, all relating to the past journeys of groups such as drovers. It was a BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week on publication, and she's written regularly for the Walk Highlands online magazine and currently has a novel seeking a publisher, and is working on a non-fiction Tales of the Sea and her family's maritime connections. And she lives in Highland, Perthshire in Scotland. Phew. You get up to a lot. So Linda, what I'd love to find out is what we're talking partly about, and this coincides with, is the publication of a collection of essays about landscape. And oh, here we go, writing landscape. So what I'd love to ask you is, do you think the essay form is lends itself best to writing about landscape? What's your feeling about essays in general?
I don't know whether it lends itself best, but it seems to work for me. And I think, I'm first and foremost a fiction writer, and I have 4 books of fiction and only 2 of non-fiction. So it's interesting that two of my books of fiction are short story collections, and one of them is somewhere between a short story collection and a novella. I don't know how to describe it. So it seems to me that I'm quite interested in the short form in general. And so when I've Doubling Back, you could describe as a book of essays. They're linked thematically, but they are a book of essays about walks. And this latest book, Writing Landscape, they're very varied in length, from 1,000 words to about 5,000. But I think we've been brave enough to use the word essay. I think until now I felt that it might put readers off because they think of school.
Well, certainly I tweeted about, I tweeted about that. I said, who likes writing essays? But no, we're back to talking about essays. What about, you've mentioned immediately there that they can be quite different in length. I mean, some, if not all of these essays in this latest anthology have been published in various magazines and things. So when you're commissioned, are you commissioned to write a certain number of words? And or are you, how does the commissioning process work on writing an essay about landscape?
Well, it's dependent. With these particular ones, it's depended. Some of them are self-commissioned. So I've written something. For example, there's one where I go to the Isle of Erryd, which is a tidal island off the Ross of Marl, where Robert Louis Stevenson set an important part of Kidnapped. And I went there because I had a fellowship coming up in Robert Louis Stevenson's name. So I thought I would take a pilgrimage to the Isle of Erryd. And I suppose I must have had the idea that I was going to write about it. I'm not sure now, but it was a very natural thing to do then, to write about it. And then I looked for a place that might want to publish it. But quite a lot of the essays in this book were actually commissioned, and they all had different requirements. So, typically they might say anything up to 4,000 words. There's one that was in Antlers of Water, which was a book of Scottish nature writing, which Kathleen Jamie edited. And I think that was up to 4,000 words, just from memory. So they come in all shapes and sizes, really. And some of them were very short. For example, there's one that was done for an organisation called Open Book, who have community reading and writing groups across Scotland. And so it was commissioned for them, and that was quite a strict 1,000 words, I seem to remember. So that was what defined that.
And I mean, you know, people in the room haven't yet read the book or may not have done yet. So I know one or two people tweeted and said, oh, we've got the book already and we're reading it. But you clearly have no fear of venturing out on your own. And, you know, you've done quite a few of these journeys. You start by cycling somewhere with your camping gear and then sort of camp out. Yeah, I mean, how did the fearlessness, the resilience, the toughness of Linda Cracknell come together? How did that happen?
I don't know. I don't really see myself like that, but I suppose I've been in training for quite some time because I first set out with a bicycle and a tent when I was about 17, and I think I had examples in my family, and my father died when I was very young, but he was an alpinist, and my mother was very sort of brave in her single parenthood, in that she, you know, would take us off places, and we accidentally climbed Snowdon in a blizzard when I was 7, and it was accidental in the sense that she didn't mean us to go to the top, but we just did. And so and my brother was a very keen cyclist, and so I suppose I had examples, and I just, having had that sense when I was 17 of independence and making my own route and meeting people along the way, and, you know, finding that I could meet the challenges, I suppose I've just continued to do that. And it hasn't seemed like such a huge thing to do somehow because of that. And I did write, when I was writing regularly for Walk Highlands, I did do a bit of a survey about women hill walking alone, because at that time I felt it was relatively unusual, and actually the reasons for women not doing it were rarely really to do with safety, because actually once you're in the hills, I know it can happen, and as we know from, I've forgotten her name, Maggie O'Farrell's story, that you can meet a murderer in the hills. It's got to be really rare, and mostly you're going to meet nice people who wish you well. But there can be lots. It's often actually for women. It's more a sense that they might be incompetent. And
well, I was going to ask. You know, there's that kind of prejudice, isn't there? The fact that you know, and you built up that kind of resilience. I mean, you don't fear, you know, tripping and breaking your foot or leg or anything like that. That's, you know, you take that all in your stride.
I don't know, because actually I did have an accident when I was in Norway, when I was in company, and had that happen when I was on my own, that would have been pretty alarming, because I did hit my head and had to go to hospital. So, you know, that was quite a lesson, and I wondered then whether I would walk on my own again. And it took me a little while to break back into it. But actually, once I was doing it, I get so much from it, and I get so much strength from it, that I didn't want to stop doing it.
Okay, so, and how do you do it practically? So when you go out, you know, you plan everything. You know, are you someone who sort of plans absolutely every move and every journey that you're going to make, or are you someone who's a bit more laissez-faire now because you're, you know, confident about being out on the hills, one, and two, when you go, are you taking a smartphone with you so you can sort of dictate into that, or are you taking a notebook or a pen? And what's the sort of Linda Cracknell, what's in your backpack?
Well, obviously a map, and you can probably see above my head lots of ordnance survey maps. So obviously I would take a map, and you know, a lightweight tent and sleeping bag and cooking stuff and all that kind of thing. But in terms, if I know that it's something I'm going to write about, then I will be very sure to have a notebook with me. And when I was doubling back, I made little notebooks, little by folding up a postcard and just stitching the pages into the postcard, and then dangling a pencil off it. which just meant that there was never an excuse not to write, to make notes, you know, that I could just write a couple of notes about something quite immediate. So this one, I see, it says lichen surprisingly crunchy, dry, but smells musty. So that was an impression as I was walking. So I would always carry some kind of notebook, and then at the end of the day, I would be more like, I would then probably have a journal of some sort with me, or a larger notebook in which I would write more of a narrative of the day, because otherwise I will forget things. But I, you know, in life in general, I never go anywhere without a notebook and a pen. So at the moment, I'm taking one around with me that size.
Yeah, I mean, are you one of those people who, you know, you invite to dinner and then we catch you writing notes?
I hope not.
Taking down little snippets of conversation.
No, I don't do that.
I remember once having dinner at the Hibbert household, Christopher Hibbert, and that's exactly what he did. And it was rather bizarre, because you sort of say something and you'd expect a reply from him. You'd suddenly discover he'd just written that down, you know, and it was like, oh.
Quite inhibiting the conversation, I would have thought.
So that was a bit crazy. Okay, so okay, you've got these notes, you've got these journals, you come back home, you know, do you immediately get into writing? Or, I mean, how's that process work? Because, I mean, something that you reveal and what's so brilliant about these essays, and what I can encourage people to read about, is that you do explore not only the places, but you also tell us a bit about how you've written about them and how you actually engage more with your surroundings, almost through writing. I mean, that's what you sort of say. You sort of say that you is it right? You commend something to heart. You actually, a location, you're only through writing. Is that right?
I think I'm a much better observer if I know that I'm going to write, and if I'm taking some notes, at least some notes, and it encourages me to pause and take note. If I don't think I'm going to write, I get caught up in the rhythm of walking, and so I don't pause. But actually, I realise that to observe properly, I need to pause and stop. And so actually, just in day-to-day life, I do, you know, I regularly in my notebook, and I've written about this in the book, I write, here I am at the top of the page. And then I just write down the sensations of being where I am. I can't find one now, but anyway, that's what I do. But yeah, when I come back, if I'm writing something, then I always write longhand. I can't type, so I get my fountain pen out and do sort of longhand scribble page. And there'll be pages and pages of that. And amongst it, so there'll be lots of nonsense and stuff that I can't use, but amongst it, there will be the bones of something that's going to be usable, which will then make its way onto the computer. And I use speech recognition software to do that, because I can't type. I'm hopeless.
Oh, no, that's brilliant. I'm really glad that I've got someone with me on that, because I'm a great user of the dictaphone on my smartphone, because I just find that I can't type at all. I'm a dyslexic typist, so that's very good. Okay, well, no, that's good news. We're allies in that. What? Maybe we should talk a little bit too about, you know, what drew you to the Highlands. I mean, you're obviously haven't got that thick brogue of a Highland Scottish woman, have you? I mean, you know, what's going on? You're obviously a Southerner. That's clear.
Yes, I am. I moved to Scotland in 1990, and I'd been walking a lot in the Highlands before that, so it sort of came quite naturally as a move. There was an opportunity which came up, which just seemed sensible to take, and I live where I live in the middle of Scotland in Highland Perthshire, because I moved here for a job with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, who had the office for Scotland here, bizarrely, because it's quite a small place. So I moved here for a job as education officer with them. And so I suppose, yes, I'm sort of, you know, that's quite a long time. Yeah.
A while back.
A while back. And so I suppose I'm here now.
Okay. Have you been accepted by the locals?
Oh, well, I'm not a local, but, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, I've got some friends.
Oh, good. um, so, you know, and who are the writers then who've inspired you yourself? And, you know, and who do you sort of most look forward to reading if they have, you know, if they're still alive and they've got a new book coming out? You know, you know, who are the contemporary writers who
Oh,
inspire you, and
right.
who are, and apart from Robert Louis Stevenson, who's got a good plug tonight, are there others?
Yes, of course. Right, I'm going to have to sort of think on the spot here. Yes, I mean, I would always, obviously, I would always look out for work by Kathleen Jamie, because her observation is so incisive, and she's very interested in the natural world, but also the human world and archaeology. And I've really enjoyed. In fact, I had the pleasure of abridging her latest book for Radio 4, which was great. So, you know, working closely with somebody else's text for that is a great pleasure. For actually observations of nature, I really like Jim Crumley, because he's such a good naturalist, that he's somebody that will sit all day in the same place waiting for something to happen. And I find that remarkable. I'm a bit too fidgety for that myself. But I like looking out for new books, and I'm particularly interested in books which are a sort of hybrid memoir stroke place, possibly stroke movement, all those kind of books that we're seeing quite a lot of coming through now. You know, I think it's an interesting kind of area. I don't tend to call it nature writing myself. I think nature writing's become a bit of a bracket for anything that happens outdoors, but there's lots of books of that nature which are worth looking at. And of course, I still read a lot of fiction. I am still a fiction writer at heart, I think, and so I would read anything by Rose Tremaine. Right, come back to me on that one. I'll think.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit, because as we talked about when we read out your introduction, you wrote one of your the Doubling Back book, for example, which that was memoir as much as anything else, was it not?
I didn't think of it as memoir, but
right, okay, because that was 10 journeys. They were 10 walking journeys that you walked again, weren't they? Of some were related to you and some were of others. And so over the last 8 to 10 years, how's your writing developed, and especially about writing about landscape? What are the things that have made you, change your writing style, if your writing style has changed at all, or maybe it's not?
Yeah, I don't know if it has, and I don't know if I'm the one to judge that. But I went back to fiction, of course, and did a book called The Other Side of Stone, which is actually, there's some parts in that were part of a novel that I started writing in 2001 or something crazy like that. Maybe, can't quite think when it was, but anyway, a long time ago. And I couldn't quite leave it alone because it had the setting of a woolen mill that I'd imagined fully, and had fully imagined some of the characters in it. So it changed enormously, but I used that as a focus for introducing some other characters from different periods in the history of this one building. So everybody in all the characters in the book relate in some way to the building, but between 1831 and 2019. So I enjoyed doing that, and again, it comes back to this doing small things. I could pick each one off individually over several years, and then ultimately it made a collection of linked stories, I guess. So that's been going on, and I suppose the difference probably between writing landscape and doubling back is that doubling back was about being fidgety and moving all the time, and writing landscape's a lot more about keeping still and still long enough to observe, and how that then affects writing. And I do find that when I'm writing fiction, the novel that I wrote called Of the Undertow, which was set in Caithness, really that whole story arose from repeated sort of examination of a small area that I walked in a lot, and I listened to the folk tales and noticed the weather and the seasons and all those things, and the story kind of developed out of that observation.
Oh, hang on, excuse me, I'm just going to mute someone.
Well, that was you.
No, it wasn't me throwing my voice. Okay. Okay, well, we've got one question in the chat, so that's a start. So, but I'm hoping you're going to encourage other people. So please, other people, write questions in the chat, comments, pithy remarks. Tell us that, you know, you found walking alone solitary or exciting or whatever. Do put something in the chat. Otherwise, you'll just keep listening to me talking to Linda all the time. But Simon, would you like to ask your question?
Oh yeah, just like just jokingly said, when does she sleep? Because it all seems there's a lot of work there, and especially with the not typing it directly, obviously a lot of time has gone into this. I mean, I just had this thought that is this a tremendous work of patience, and there's no sort of buying something out here, is there? And then, you know, it's out the following week, and you put a lot of time and effort into this. And is it maybe somehow meditative or almost spiritual for you? I'll stop there.
Oh, that's an interesting question. The other thing I didn't mention is that I do millions of drafts, and well, not millions, but you know, quite a number. So it does take me quite a long time to craft any piece of writing. Actually, it's not just non-fiction, fiction as well. I do lots and lots of drafts, and that may be partly because at the beginning I don't know exactly what it is I want to say, and I discover it through writing. And I think that's probably the difference between, you know, I know we're all so different in our writing processes, and some people actually conceive their ideas, even if they're quite abstract ideas, they conceive them ahead of the writing, which seems like quite a good idea, really. But for me, I discover it through writing, so it's a very long process.
So it's almost like an active processing in a way. It really is an exploration, because you haven't got a preconceived idea of where you're going. I like that.
Yeah, but whether it's spiritual or not, I don't know. It's an interesting.
I use that in the broadest possible context, and then sorry, just to say, I think essays are fantastic. You know, because not everything needs a book, and there's so much to write about and so much to talk about. With which I will stop and let someone else ask a question.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, Lottie, are you there?
I am. I think another question from Robert might be quite in the same line. But I was wondering how do you select where to walk and write, and then also when to walk and not write? Or do you also always write and then maybe sometimes there is a bigger story, and sometimes not?
No, I do a lot of walking when I have no intention of writing about it. So I usually know if I'm, and in fact, I'm actually just thinking about a walk that I might do. So I'm starting to gather ideas for it, but it'll be later in the summer. But generally, I walk for pleasure and recreation as much as for having writing material at the moment. And actually the recent book, Writing Landscape, they're not all walks. Some of them do have walks in them, but not all of them. And I think I don't know if I do a lot of planning. I mean, certainly plan the route. You know, I want to know where I'm going roughly, and that's not to say I might not change it. And I probably do a little bit of research, but then I would do a lot of it afterwards. And then unfortunately, sometimes that means you find out all the things you missed along the way, but usually not. You know, usually it comes to life then, and you know, I have a look and see whether there's any literature that's connected with the area. That can be quite a nice, rich thing to do as well, because it might give you a companion, you know, somebody who's written about it. I did a walk in Spain for Doubling Back, which was actually about following some old paths which went back to medieval Spain at the time when it was still partly a Muslim country, and I took with me Robert Byron's, what's it called? Somebody will know. Robert Byron's Road to help. Anyway.
Oxiana.
Oh, well done, whoever that was. Thank you. Which is so pertinent, because, and it was an accident, but it was so pertinent to read that while I was walking, because it was all about Islamic architecture. So it was just amazing, and to see some of the same, what felt like some of the same landscapes appearing is incredible. So actually choosing what to read on a long walk, I think, is really critical and tricky.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And Nikki, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, hello.
Nikki.
Hi, Linda. Hi. So yeah, I was very interested to hear about essays, and I just wondered how the landscape kind of infected, if you like, the form of the essay.
Yeah,
did it? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it does, to be honest. Might do a bit in length. Perhaps, depending on the nature of the experience, but I can't think of an example where the form sort of went experimental as a result of the nature of the landscape. It's an interesting idea, though. Thank you.
Well, maybe this is the time to ask Bob. Bob,
you picked up on what somebody said about the spiritual. What is that for you, and how does it link with your walking? Is there any? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, this is quite an interesting question, because I was thinking about it today, funnily enough, as I was strolling along, because I've been invited to speak at the local church, and I was trying to think how I've made it very clear that I'm not particularly a practicing, well, I'm not a practicing Christian, and I was thinking, well, what am I? And because I think I do have a spiritual side, but I think it's pagan, really. It's it's to do with the seasons and appreciating the world and what's around us, and to that extent, it does feel like it's spiritual to some extent, but it's very.
That's my understanding of the spiritual. It's not really the religious side of it. So I'm interested in sort of inquiring more about that. When you say the pagan, do you find, or druidity, do you find aspects of that on your walk? Are there ley lines, or I don't know, whatever, I don't know, burial mounds, or is there a thing in the air that you pick up, vibes of, I don't know, ghosts, or I don't know, whatever it is?
Well, because a lot of people talk about thin places, and that when you actually climb a mountain, you get to a thin place. I don't know whether it's the air thinning or what, but yeah, Linda, what's your take on it?
Well, I think I've never set out to walk a ley line, but I am quite interested in where you come across things in the land which clearly have meant something to people in the past, whether it's, a church or a mound, or, often the old churches are on pagan sites, they're in significant places. And I think there's another thing that happens, which is that I've noticed when I do a really long walk. So I did that. I think the longest one in Doubling Back is a walk of 14 days between my front door and the Isle of Skye, following a drover's route in reverse. And I think I became very suggestible because I had so much time on my own and so much time being bashed by the terrible weather that actually things started to take on more significance than perhaps they would have done otherwise. And there's one short essay that's in Writing Landscape, which is about an experience I had in a bothy at the end of that walk, when I was really terrified. Actually, I was just so suggestible. I convinced myself that the bothy was haunted, and that isn't normal for me. Normally, I'm a bit more practical than that, but I was actually really quite scared.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I keep on coming in and saying too much. Is there a link, like someone like Graham Sutherland? You think of his landscapes as having, well, a sense of, or someone like Paul Nash. They're all different. They have different qualities that they ascribe. So that's from a painterly point of view. Is there something from a writerly point of view that links in that same way in what's observed and what is something enormously intangible? So I can't really.
Yeah, well, I love both those painters, but I think it's the animate nature of landscape. You know, when you start reading landscape as if it's animate, then it takes on, I don't know, it takes on a power that's perhaps that is a spiritual power.
We got two questions from two Jeffs. Actually, I think I'm going to take the second Jeff first. So Jeff Jones, I love your question. So can you pitch in there, and then we'll come to Jeff Cox.
Just seen it.
So, you've just seen it. So Jeff Jones, are you there?
Is there anybody here from Newport Pagnell? Oh, good. Right.
Yes, where is Newport Pagnell? I don't know where it is.
I hitchhiked through it once, but other than that, it's unfair, me picking on Newport Pagnell. I think it's M1, it's got a service station. But the question is it better to be in Perthshire than Newport Pagnell to write about landscape? I think I've chosen Newport Pagnell perhaps as a sort of nun place. I think a lot of landscape has been converted into nun place or has been bleached of its character. So, but you're a talented landscape writer, so presumably you could write about landscape anywhere. Maybe not.
Ooh. Well, I don't know. I haven't been to Newport Pagnell, and I wouldn't want to write it off. But I have, in writing landscape, I have written a piece about, which previously appeared in Walk Highlands online magazine, about Edinburgh and the possibilities of Edinburgh. I know Edinburgh and Newport Pagnell are probably not comparable, but I just mean in terms of an urban setting. And then there's another essay which is about Edwin Morgan, who wrote an amazing poem about starlings in George Square in Glasgow. And I do find, actually, in terms of people walking, actually, you know, the vast majority of walking is done in urban environments and cities, and it is a fascinating thing. And actually, you know, one of the things in the Edinburgh piece, one of the things that I was lamenting was the fact that I used to do a 10-minute walk between the station and a place of work, and I did this walk for 5 years, and I never varied the route. And there were so many different ways I could have gone, which would have been fascinating, or different ways of walking, you know, to take different style of walking. And I didn't do it.
I was thinking as much about the countryside around places like Newport Pagnell, which is, you know, over the past 50 years has been roads, motorways, and it's therefore, I suppose, to the casual observer, fairly bland. So I suppose, in a sense, part of my question, I'm alluding to the fact that you're in a very rich landscape, and that must help the landscape writer.
I think so, but I'm also quite interested in where the human and the natural interact. I think they're interesting places, and so, you know, it could be that a place that's superficially ugly because it's got, you know, flyovers or whatever actually might be a very rich place to write about, because it may be a place that people don't walk very much, and there might be all sorts of interesting discoveries to be made there.
Yeah. I think Dave Borthwick Dave Borthwick has popped something in the chat where he's coming back to the defence of motorway service stations and all sorts. But I remember actually I interviewed someone for Talking Walking, and he walked the route of the I think it was the I'm getting confused, M47 or the M52, but he walked the route of a motorway, and he did it. And he admits in what he wrote about it, he admits that he thought he was going to be tackling blandness, but actually he found that there was interest in the minutiae, in the detail, and Linda, that's something that you talk about as getting down on your hands and knees and using a hand lens to look at the lichen and things. But let's come back to Jeff Cox, because Jeff Cox, it appears to me he's actually read the book, or at least he's read some of it.
But not the last essay, apparently.
No, absolutely not. Hi, Linda.
Hi.
I was intrigued in the French journey that you describe in Writing Landscapes. You describe sitting by a river and letting the river flow past you. And I was really intrigued at this in relation, because I always associate you with walking journeys. And this intrigued me as the idea of kind of a static walk where you sit still and let the world come past you, which you described. I'm just intrigued by that idea. So could you say a little bit more?
Yes,
about
well, it was the fact that I was in this place in France in order to do as much writing as possible, and the problem with writing is you sort of have to keep still, really, especially if you're using a computer. But I'd been reflecting on my journey there as I took the train from Scotland to London and then through France. That actually the movement of the train is a little bit, it's quite, I love a train journey for meditation and writing, because it has that sort of same kind of feeling as walking in a way. But then during the course of that month that I had beside that river in France, the river was the companion to my writing, and I would sit beside it, I'd swim in it, did all sorts of I did walk as well, but I realized that actually there's something about the motion. It was a little bit like watching landscape go by through a train window. So it did mean that I could sit still and write at the same time.
Nirmal, have I pronounced your name right? I do beg your pardon if I haven't, but Nirmal, you have a...
Hi, yes, you've pronounced it right. I just wanted to ask, given that, one can notice so many things, even in, I don't know, a walk that might take you 5 minutes, you could write so many thousands of words from it. When do you know with your books when to stop? I walked with a botanist, a walk that would take me 10 minutes. Took us 2 hours. When do you know when to stop with your observations and also with your writing?
I think it's I think that's a really critical question with the writing, because you will bore people quite quickly if you just describe. And so it's a question of finding a narrative which is more than description, and then having enough detail in the observation to bring it alive, to put somebody there, but not overdoing it. So there's always much more in my notebook than there is on the finished page because of that, because it's something I had to learn doing doubling back, and I feel it myself when I read. Actually, after a paragraph or two of description, you want something to happen. So it's quite important that something happens. So it's a different thing, walking with a botanist for a couple of hours would be fascinating, I'm sure, over a small area, but you would only be able to use a fraction of that in a written piece to keep people engaged.
Dave, you can ask a question. Is you there? having sent him to the motorway service station of hell.
Hi, Dave.
Hi. Hi there, Linda. It's lovely to see you.
And you.
I was just wondering about the last chapter of the book, which is called Serious Noticing for Playful People. And it's a number of prompts or instructions for folk to observe and write. And I just wondered, why did you decide to end like that? And what do you hope people will do with it? How will the life of the book go on?
Yeah, that was actually the publisher Saraban's suggestion. And because I do quite a lot of teaching and workshops, and often they're outside, or an element of them are outside, I had gathered quite a lot of activities which seemed to help people to tune in to where they are and observe and come up with some notes. And so it was really, it was a tip sheet that I already had developed. And I wasn't sure whether it fitted with the book or not, but people seemed to like it. And I suppose with the title being Writing Landscape, there is a possibility that people are picking up because they're interested in writing, and that might just lead them off to have a go at a few of them. So I don't know. I'll be interested to hear whether people have been using them or not. But really, it's aimed at getting people to activate their senses, particularly, and then find different ways of looking if they're looking. It's not.
No, I think it's just super. It just democratizes writing about landscape terrifically, and I'm going to be shamelessly plagiarizing you for years.
Please do. Yeah. I've probably plagiarized others in making it, but I do certainly find in any workshop situation, everybody can do it. And on Sunday I was in Perth at the Suta Festival of Words, and there was an absolutely terrible weather forecast, and we were supposed to be doing a walking workshop, and actually we just stood outside the library under a sort of covered archway with a few plants around us and a bit of pavement, and we were able to do all those activities with no problem, and it created a lot of discussion and words. So
as it happens, Iona's posted something and she's about to take part in a creative writing workshop, so a place writing one at that. So Iona, do you want to talk about these books and things that you've been reading?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, so I'm doing a wonderful course at the moment called The Poetics of Place, which is run by a nature writer poet called Joss Smith at the University of East Anglia. And tomorrow we're looking at edgelands, so kind of looking at exactly this idea of like the rubbing up of the sort of human realm and the nature, as if they were ever completely separate anyway. But we've been reading some extracts from Richard Mabey's book, The Unofficial Countryside, which I think was originally written in the 70s. And so, of course, lots has changed since then, but he wrote an introduction to it in 2010, I think, where he said the sort of point of the book was looking at like the ability for nature, and I say that, quote unquote nature, but the ability for it to sort of survive along, coexist with humans, but also sort of in spite of humans, being able to find the little cracks of soil that somehow gather in the concrete and that kind of thing. And so he said, even though a lot's changed since the 70s, he didn't feel like he wanted to write an updated version because it's the same spirit, basically. And then, Edgelands, which has got really great, Edgelands is separated out into different chapters. There's one called Cars, there's one called Piers, there's one called, I think, Wastewater or something, but it's just sort of 20 different chapters, or about 20 different chapters, but and it's co-written, actually, interestingly, between the two writers, and they don't ever indicate who's writing when, but it's just sort of what those things inspired in them. So I recommend the read. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think I have read Edgelands, actually. I don't think I've read the other one. But I was thinking about when we were talking about motorways and those kind of margins, where actually, there's actually not that much human interference on the margins of motorways. So there's all sorts of interesting. I find it even quite interesting. I know this sounds awful, but you know, people throw litter out their windows, and even just observing what the litter is, I find quite interesting. But I think the time that I most noticed that sort of way that nature reasserts itself was when I had a bad leg injury and I could only walk very, very, very slowly. I was sort of, you know, walking like a 2-year-old really. And I started really noticing the tiny little growths that you get in cracks and that kind of thing, which I don't normally do. I'm just walking too fast. That sounds really great, Iona. Fantastic.
And Iona, how much of the course have you done, or have you not started it yet?
Oh, well, this is how to explain. This is like a 3-month master's course, which I'm just getting to sit in on. So it's almost finished, but yeah, it's been great. Yeah.
Oh, good, excellent. All right, and Nirmal, you popped in something that you've actually written about litter. Is that right?
That sounds interesting. Oh, I'd like to read that.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I started to write about walking, actually. I didn't set out to write about walking, but I realized I wanted to write about litter. And as you say, Linda, one has to have a narrative. And so the litter actually gave me a narrative.
Interesting.
And interestingly, so I just wrote it almost as a cathartic piece. But then it's been used by neighborhood or associations. So that was actually quite interesting.
Yeah, oh, I'd love to. Has that been published?
Yeah, I'll put it in the link. It's open access.
Would you? That'd be great.
Yeah.
I'd love to read that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. That's brilliant. You've been a fantastic guest at the salon.
Well, thank you for having me, and lovely to see everyone.
And thank you for writing such a great book of essays. I really enjoyed reading them. And as I say, coming up, we've got Linda gets the last word, but coming up first, I just want to say a reminder to everyone. Thanks again very much for supporting Walk, Listen, Create. We're out there trying to support writers, artists, and performers who use walking as a catalyst in their practice. So if that means that's you, and please take the opportunity of improving on your profile, adding links to your profile, headshot or whatever. Come along to more events in the future. I went through them earlier, but you'll find them. They're listed on the Walk, Listen, Create website. We have a writing competition running at the moment. The theme is walking away or walking a way. So perhaps you've been inspired from this salon to perhaps put pen to paper and do that. But Linda, you get the last word, and to cover anything else that anyone has dropped in the chat that you'd like to make a comment on.
Oh, I don't know if I've seen everything in the chat actually, but lots of lovely comments. But really just to say thank you for coming along, and thank you for your interesting comments and questions. Actually, they're really, really interesting, and happy walking.
But yeah, come back and see us again soon. And thanks once again, Linda. Fantastic.
It's a pleasure.